it's possible that this is Jewish violence or Christian violence or Hindu violence or Taoist violence. I'm sure that you had all of these things running through your mind, and then, eventually you ruled out that it was Islamic violence altogether. Or when you first heard about it, did you think, aha, the religion of peace has struck again? 7 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you. Thank you for joining me this morning. We're at, right now, I guess it's currently 54. I'm trying to read that. It might read, no, it's 64, I guess. 64. So we're on our way probably today. My my temperature gauge says a high of 69 today. Don't buy that. We're back up into some really warm temperatures over the next several days, at least for the foreseeable future. So possibly near 90 today before we're done, at least into the 80s. I want to thank you for joining me today. Look, we've got a lot packed into the show today. I really only have, if you subtract all of the time we have for the breaks and the news and everything else during the course of the program, I have 77 minutes of actual talk time per morning. We have a guest coming by in about 25 minutes who's going to talk with us briefly about the need, as they always have a need, a growing need, for more volunteers for the Twin Falls Senior Center. That's on the way. Also, in the hour number 2 of the program, some of you may know Pastor Paul Thompson. He is with the Eastside Baptist Church here in Twin Falls. He has a blog where he writes about a lot of issues that are near and dear to, I think, not just Christians, but people of faith. And if you didn't see it the other day, some homosexual lobbyist group took Raul Labrador to task online for supporting the First Amendment Defense Act. And they literally went back through some archives of my shows. This was a national organization. Found an appearance by Labrador on this program in April and started chiding him because, well, he is supporting the rights of Christians versus the rights of them to force Christians to do whatever they want Christians to do. And Pastor Paul has written extensively about this. He's going to be joining us. We'll talk a little bit about religious liberty with him. But I think it's going to be a rather wide-ranging conversation because obviously, from his perspective, he has thoughts about where our culture is going, perhaps where this cultural war is going with another faith that we're dealing with. But anyway, he'll be available to answer some of your telephone calls in the next hour of the program. And I'm hopeful that we can make this somewhat of a regular meeting with him on the air because I think it would be nice to get some of these people in. And I'm going to tell you something very quickly, though. I have a lot of friends out there, and I agree with them to an extent. They say we need to pray for the jihadists. I agree with that. Well, they say we need to pray for their conversions. As a Christian, I agree with that too. Albeit I would just settle for them stopping the jihadi movement and the war on the Western world. That would be enough for me at this point. But I'd like to remind you that in World War II, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt didn't go to Congress and say, well, pray for the Japanese, and then walk away. No, he said, hey, we're going to go kick the snot out of them. And we prayed for the Germans and the Italians, I'm sure, as well, but the same idea. And the war ended eventually because men like General Curtis LeMay were put in charge of the air war, first in Europe and then in Asia, and they simply concluded that bringing enough mayhem to the enemy, that there was a certain threshold that the enemy could no longer bear. The Japanese had said they would fight until every last man, woman, and child. And LeMay turned the tables on them with the B-29s and just started taking out their cities, even before the atomic bombs, one by one, just taking them off the chessboard. It was brutal, it was nasty, horrific. And yet it hastened the end of the war and likely saved a lot more lives. It also deterred a lot of other people around the world for a very long time afterward about ever thinking of something like this. And I was listening last night to Bill O'Reilly's program, and of course he had a couple of guests on who were running for president talking about this very subject. One of them basically says we should kill these bad guys. The other says, we need to have bilateral action. One of those was a Democrat. Guess which one? Which one is now seeing some movement in the polls not to her benefit? Well, that's because she sits there and talks about bilateral action, where Donald Trump says, we need to go just kill these guys. Which one do you think the American people better react to? Which one do you think they think is more logical? This is Bill O'Reilly speaking with former Secretary of State and U.S. Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, and she's explaining we should stay the course that President Obama has set out.
We have to keep pushing them into a smaller and smaller territory so that we can take out their leadership, take out their infrastructure, and do as much as possible to end territory.
But don't you think the world at this point, I think two things have to happen. Number one, President Obama has to call a summit meeting of all the Western countries, and ISIS has to be the focal point. We all have to join together. And number two, we have to make a statement. And the statement would be, we know they're in Raqqa, we know this is their headquarters, and that headquarters is 35 miles away from the Turkish border, a NATO ally, and we're going to come in, and that's not going to be their headquarters anymore. That's what I would do.
Well, look, that is, in my view, not the most effective way. What is happening now is we are taking territory back in Iraq. We are squeezing them with inconsistent air attacks.
We've been squeezing them for how long? It was a couple of years ago. The president called them the JV squad. I think we got to go back to 2012 when these people first started taking over all of these territories, chopping off heads, drowning people, burning people alive, raping women, and those women who refused to be raped were burned alive. You got all of these things going on, and yet, look, we could take the Gary Johnson approach, which says we don't belong in that part of the world, so let's ignore it and let them burn people to death. Okay, probably some validity to his argument. Why get involved with something like this? But the war has already come here, as Orlando, Florida demonstrates. It has already come here. We're talking about a territory that can't be any bigger, by the way, than Connecticut and Rhode Island, my friends. What sort of blindness do the Democrats have here? If we got together with the French and the English and even the Russians, I'm sick to death of hearing, well, Vladimir Putin is a bad guy, bad dude. He wants this to come to an end, too. His country has been struggling with these people a lot longer than we have. You got to go back to that school attack in Beslan and the problems with the Chechnyan rebels and when they took over the theater in Moscow. I mean, he's been dealing with it a long time. Look, Stalin was a lot worse than Putin, and we were able to deal with him in World War II as an ally. This is Clinton, though. I'm not going to completely criticize her. She is right about one thing, at least on this count.
In Europe, one of their problems has been, and they'd better address this, and it affects us too, they don't share enough information even across their borders.
Absolutely true. She's spot on about that. Once in a great while, I get to agree with her. Twice a day, a stop clock is right. And she was spot on about that. And they talk about the European Union, yet they can't even get together and talk about terrorism together. 814, we have a caller with us. You're next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. We have to realize that Islam has had a war on the world for almost 1,400 years. We need to be waking up to this fact. And, this terrorist, these are fundamentalists. These are not radical extremists. These are people that follow the Quran, which in over 100 verses commands them to kill unbelievers. And these statements that are released by the ISIS and so forth said, it's take out the unbelievers. And so any way you can. And so obviously the guy's name, I think, was Mohammed. I wonder what so let's figure that one out. But anyway, Bill, we just have to realize these people have declared war on the world. It's been going on, but they're in the caliphate now. And I would recommend people read Glenn Beck's book. It's about Islam, but their whole theology, I should say theocracy, is a political war. It's not really a religion if they hide behind the facade of a religion. And we better wake up to that fact, stop this immigration. Trump is right. I hope that he doesn't pick Pence, because Pence is not, he's one of the good old boys in my opinion. But anyway, we need to wake up, stop the immigration, refugees, otherwise. And because it's going to continue, we need to realize those that follow the Quran are commanded to kill us.
And I thank you much for the call. Speaking of Pence, the other alternative, many people said, in this choice for vice president is Newt Gingrich. Gingrich is taking a lot of heat from liberals today for some comments he made last night on Sean Hannity's program on the Fox News Channel.
Western civilization is in a war. We should, frankly, test every person from here who is of a Muslim background, and if they believe in Sharia, they should be deported. Sharia is incompatible with Western civilization. Modern Muslims who have given up Sharia, glad to have them as citizens, perfectly happy to have them next door. But we need to be fairly relentless about defining who our enemies are. Anybody who goes on a website favoring ISIS or Al Qaeda or other terrorist groups, that should be a felony and they should go to jail. Any organization which hosts such a website should be engaged in a felony. It should be closed down immediately. Our forces should be used to systematically destroy every internet-based source. And frankly, if we can't destroy them through the internet, we should destroy them with kinetic power, using various weapons, starting with predators, and just frankly just killing them. I am sick and tired of being told that the wealthiest, most powerful civilization in history, all of Western civilization, is helpless in the face of a group of medieval barbarians.
Medieval barbarians. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. It's 817.
Yes, thank you. You know, I've really struggled trying to understand our foreign policy and the way we're trying to prosecute this war. The other day I read an article in the paper, and they were talking about how ISIS is fairly well funded through their oil wells that they've captured. They're operating, and they gain millions of dollars a month through their oil wells. Well, heavens to Betsy, if we can't find the will to destroy their oil wells and stop their source of funding, we don't have the will to end this war.
Well, we don't have a lot of the will right now, and I thank you for the call. Let me add to that. I was watching for a few brief moments this morning. I know it's tortuous. I decided to turn on the coverage on MSDNC's Morning Joe, and they were all venting about Gingrich. How dare he? How dare he say that? Well, wait a minute here. Sharia law, as he pointed out, is not compatible with our Constitution. You cannot have both. We've got to understand that. This is one country. It has one Constitution. Our founding documents have been handed down through us, or to us, through the English parliamentary system and centuries, if not millennia, of the development of English common law. That's pretty clear to us. Sharia is not compatible with that. Now, your average lefty liberal out there on Morning Joe, they think that, well, the Constitution, Sharia, pick one. Just like they think when it comes to religious faith, because they're all a bunch of, basically godless liberal pukes. They look at it this way and they say, well, it's like shopping for coffees. One week, Folgers might be on sale. The next week, it might be chock full of nuts. So go ahead and pick one out there. One religion is just as bad as the next in their opinion, as is one form of government, apparently, because don't you know those founding fathers were slaveholders? There's still one part of the world where slavery is acceptable. The Islamic world, and the ISIS caliphate especially. But hey, we don't like Newt because Newt's not a liberal and a lefty, and he thinks we're in a war. Ha, 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 ha. We're not in a war. We need Hillary around so we can have more men who think they're women going into bathrooms, and have more transgendered troops, too. In fact, we should put our troops in pink and have them go fight ISIS. Yeah, that's the ticket. That'll work. I've got more on this subject. Here's a question I want you to contemplate before the next segment of the program. So I was going to say, just a break cut me off, but here's a question for you. This is not an endorsement or a recommendation, but let me ask you a question. If tomorrow morning you woke up and Islam was gone from the face of the planet, there were no more Muslims anywhere in the world, let's just say you woke up and that's what happened. Do you think the world would be a better place? Do you think the world would be a safer place? Well, it's not much of a leap to go from there, and unfortunately this is with a clash of civilizations, I think, the direction we're headed. If you could go and you could push a button and just smack that button and make that all come true by tomorrow morning, are you at that point where you would do it? I think that's a reasonable question to throw at people, because it seems that there's no end to what's going on here. And even if you crush the physical Islamic State, which does have a capital and it does have territory. I was talking to a state legislator a few weeks ago, and he came right out and said that. How come we don't have a declaration of war? He didn't want to be identified on this, but, I think that's a good point. How come we don't have a declaration of war? Because you can point to the capital, Raqqa, and you can point to the land they have, and you can say, aha, there you go. Because we've been hearing this excuse, well, this is just a nebulous group, and, we can't approach it that. Baloney. But even if they're gone, you're still going to have jerks like this guy you got in this truck. It looked like the size of an 18-wheeler and starts running down people. Which goes back to my question just a couple of minutes ago. If you could push that button and they would all go away, and tomorrow morning you got up, would the world be a better place? Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com at 63. You can reach our program today by dialing 736-0300, 736-0300. Want to tell you about my friends at Ramsey Heating and Electric. Now, next week, we're looking at a string of 90-degree days. We're not done yet with those, but obviously, as we head toward August, we start thinking about preparations for winter, or you should be. And if you have a heating unit, you want that someone to at least evaluate it before you get to winter. You need to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. The team at Ramsey's will make sure it's done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters. You can find those through Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. You can call them at 678. Got to get my Burley exchange right here. 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Do want to remind you as well, Dr. Jonathan Tripp is on a mission trip in Nicaragua. He may not be back on the program next week. He'll be back in town in a couple of days. But next Wednesday morning, we will have one of the medical professionals dropping by from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. And I need to note, Tripp Family Medicine continues to look for new patients. And if you're a patient at Tripp Family Medicine, you can generally, if you have an issue, you wake up in the morning with a little diarrhea. I know you're eating your breakfast or a cold or something along those lines, and you want someone to check you out. You can often get in the very same day. They're looking, as I say, for new patients. They're located on Fillmore Street in the city of Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. 8:27 now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Got a guest coming up in a few minutes from the Twin Falls Senior Center, obviously looking for more volunteers because of the growth that they continue to have and the need that they continue to have. In the meantime, though, I just want to wrap up this segment with this from theresurgent.com, which is the website of Eric Erickson. The American media calls Americans terrorists more quickly than actual terrorists. And this is what he has to say. A terrorist attack occurred in France, but you would never know it from the American media. The New York Times called it a mass casualty event. Before, MSDNC called it a truck attack, as if a truck on its own attacked people. Perhaps it was named Carrie. I think he means Christine. This is a peculiar trend in the American media. If a white guy in the United States shoots up any place other than the Family Research Council, the American media quickly pounces and calls it a terrorist attack. But if an Islamic radical does it, it is a mass shooting or workplace violence. I heard a comment last night from Charles Krauthammer, was appearing on Fox, and he said, the French president will not be calling for truck control. I think we know who that was directed at. And another quick point about all of this is this was coming down and this was taking place. A friend of mine explained he is the counterpart to Chris Anderson at a planetarium and museum in Kentucky. And he commented on his Facebook page. He got into a debate last week. Did you hear that horrid story out of Texas? A woman got angry with her husband, who said that they were going to separate, so she shot and killed their two daughters. And he said one of his liberal friends said this is why we need gun confiscation in this country. He said, well, she could have just as well hit her daughters with a rock or stabbed them or run them down with a car. And his liberal friend said, oh, silly, you can run out of the way of a car. Apparently not a truck. 84 dead, at least 50 critically injured. The death toll in Nice, France could soon exceed 100. And here we go again. The lefties all out there want to say, well, yeah, he had a gun too, and he jumped out and started shooting at people. The problem wasn't his gun or his truck. It's his ideology. And until we crush that ideology, we're not going to have any peace. I resume that question, one that I want you to contemplate. If tomorrow you woke up and there was no Islam on the planet and no adherents of Islam, would the world be a better place? Jeanette Rowe is going to be joining us in just a couple of minutes from the Twin Falls Senior Center, spending a little time with us talking about some needs they have. I hope you can stick around as well. Also, Paul Thompson, pastor of Eastside Baptist Church in Twin Falls, joining us just after the 9 o'clock news today here on KLIX with Bill Colley on Top Story. It's 8:30. Quick note, this program, of course, has a lot of folks who ensure that it gets on the air every day. That also includes advertisers who support KLIX we would ask you to support them, including Dr. Christine Pickup, Doctor of Audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert, now the only locally owned independent hearing healthcare practice in all of southern Idaho. She'd like to remind you, we're just talking about how people are living longer, and Dr. Pickup would like to tell you that people are living longer and often healthier lives. However, cognitive decline continues to be a major concern. I guess like Ruth Bader Ginsburg has. People with hearing loss have a much greater risk of developing cognitive decline, which can lead to dementia. The greater the loss, the greater the risk. Keeping your hearing healthy is an important part of overall wellness. Knowing your hearing status, doing something about it, that can lead to a better and healthier life as you age. Now is the time to schedule a hearing evaluation. You can call her at Mount Harrison Audiology for an appointment, 312-0957. I was out driving in the Rupert Burley area a few weeks ago and just doing a little sightseeing, and it was my first real serious trip through there where I had the time just to go do it on a Saturday. Some caller to the show about 6 months ago said Burley was the armpit of Idaho. And I thought, that's not a very, but probably was a caller from Rupert, because I understand on one side of the river or another, there's a lot of competition. The growth out there makes it one big run-on community, but there's a lot of like civic and local pride and sort of like neighborhood pride. And if you're on one side of the river, you have a burr up your backside about the other side of the river. But I crossed the river and I didn't really notice much of a difference between the two communities, number one. And number two, I thought they both looked very pretty. I came around the backside, stopped in Declo, and then bought gas near there, and then came down into Burley by the river. And I thought, this is positively beautiful. And the downtown areas look really, really busy. That's not a bad thing. And now you've got Dow, which is going to be opening a business out there. If there's one thing to be said about Idaho, it has seen a lot of growth in job opportunities that a lot of the other parts of the country haven't seen. This year's election is about, mainly, it seems at the moment, terrorism and cop killings, Black Lives Matter, all of these issues, transgendered bathrooms. But I believe, and I said this the other day, that ultimately, election 2016 comes down to how you feel about your job prospects and your own future. Now, that includes your safety. So this worldwide jihad, obviously, is going to have an impact. And what happened in France last night reminds us again it can happen here. And because we live in open societies, and if you want to continue to live in an open society, you're going to take a risk, unless, of course, as I said earlier, you wipe out the risk altogether. Easier said than done, and I know that's true. I've been posing the question so far all morning. If you were to wake up and tomorrow morning you woke up and there was no Islam left on the planet, would the world be a better place? I've been pitching that question to people this morning just to see what your thoughts might be, and you can share your thoughts with me on that at 736-0300. That's 736-0300. On the other hand, as I said, ultimately, I think this election comes down to how you feel about your job prospects, your children's job prospects, and your overall future stability. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes, but I want to get back to the telephones. And you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. You're asking if the world would be a better place when we got rid of the jihadis. No, it might be better for a year, but the only way it would be better is if you get rid of the people who set the Middle East on fire with destroying Iraq, Libya, and right now are trying to destroy Syria. You get rid of those people and the people that are running them, and the world would be 100% better.
Hey, I got a comment here I'll share with you. A friend of mine, raised in a Jewish household, says the world would be better off with less Hamas and more hummus. Thank you for the call. We've got a lot of people around the world, as he points out, who I believe are profiting from all of this chaos. And they're welcoming it because they see a way to divide people and in the long run break barriers down, and eventually they'd like to homogenize the population as well as reduce it. I mean, greatly reduce it. That's the whole notion behind all of this climate change gobbledygook and telling people they have to cut back on meat production and the consumption of meat, and we've got to get rid of our, because you know what? Somebody in Europe will talk about truck control now, and they'll say, well, People should be driving around anyway in big trucks and eliminate cars too. And then, see, we won't be able to run people down and everyone could just take the train. And, well, then they'll bomb the trains, of course. But, hey, if that reduces the surplus population, the globalists will go along with that, I suppose. Because they're all living behind their gated communities, right? And if they want to go to the airport, they don't have to worry about an airport bombing because they'll go through another gate, a private gate, and take their private planes somewhere else. I lived in a small city back in the 1990s, and we had a public airport, small National Air Guard base beside the big airport, and then lo and behold, around the other side was a little private airstrip, and that's where all the politicians would fly in and out of. And it was called Exec Air, and they would come in and out of there, and they never had to deal with a hoi polloi. 850. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I've got this as well. Talking about the economics of what's coming up. The last few days, I have to tell you something. I have been of the opinion, because I supported other people than Donald Trump. I mean, by the time we got to Idaho, it was really a two-horse race in the Republican Party, and I went with Ted Cruz. I had no problem with doing that, but I thought that there were better choices out of the original 17 Republicans we had. Raul Labrador joked at the state Republican convention last month. He said, I'll support Trump. He said, although I had 16 other choices first. And I thought that was a great line, but I'll support Trump over Hillary Rotten Clinton any day. And I have, in the last week, decided, after seeing some of these polls, Trump really does have an opportunity to win this election. And it well could be at this stage of the game that we see nothing but growing numbers in Trump's polls, and that by the time we get to November, that it'll be a landslide. Now, I know that the lefties out there say it can't happen. 2 weeks ago, they were saying it was all over and you Republicans could stay home. Their girl Hillary was going to be president, and you just, better learn to live with that. And now the polls are showing Trump coming out on top in some of the swing states and closing the gap in other states. And her problems, we all know that she got away scot-free with a life of crime after last week. People are upset about that. She's a terrible public speaker. She doesn't do retail politics well. And she sits here and talks after an attack in France last night that will eventually, the death toll will exceed 100. She says, women and children and innocents dead. We've got to stay the course with what we're doing. We need a bilateral approach. That's what she said on TV last night, where the Republicans are saying, we just need to kill these people. I'm a voter. When I hear bilateral approach, I just tune out. It's like me. There's a story it's in my big pile today about the Export-Import Bank. I was going to talk about that this morning, but you know what? You say Export-Import Bank on the air and people's eyes just glass over. It's the same way with a bilateral approach. No, I want the bad guys dead. That will ensure that I am safe. That's how that works. Now, Trump, his poll numbers, liberals are out there saying, well, the polls all have to be wrong. They can't be true because, liberalism is a self-evident truth, and most people are liberals because, of course, they know the self-evident truth. And if you're not a liberal, there's something wrong with you, but you have to be in the minority. You must be some grumpy old white guy clinging to God and guns. It's 8:52. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. But a funny thing has been happening. Trump has been sounding more and more presidential than he did 6 months ago. And Hillary Clinton continues to sound like, well, yeah, you get the drift. This is radio host Mike Gallagher appearing yesterday on Special Report on the Fox News Channel. And he says, and by the way, he's backed up by The Hill, which is a very liberal newspaper, that the Democrats are very worried right now.
Team Clinton has outspent Team Trump about 40-1 in the battleground states. And so if these polls are correct, you've got to be very, very nervous and very anxious if you are, a Hillary supporter and you're in the Clinton campaign. There's no way on paper that if you spend that kind of money, that they're neck and neck in any kind of poll anywhere. Mr. Trump said it to you in your interview that he pointed out, I haven't even begun to spend.
I have not yet begun to spend. I remember that great line. Wasn't it John Paul Jones? Something like that. 8:53. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Good morning, Bill. This is Pat.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not a real young guy anymore, but when they put the Japanese in concentration camps, or what do you want to call them, I can understand how that came about just because they didn't know who they could trust. We're not in that situation where who can we trust? Can we trust them when they say, oh, we're peaceful, and then they're not? How do you draw a line between peaceful people and non-peaceful people? Sharia law's got to be the dividing line. Anybody that believes in the Sharia law or even contemplates Sharia law, personally, I believe they should be sent back to where they came from.
I don't have a problem with any of that. We're talking national and cultural survival, and all of this talk you hear from the Catherine Talkingtons of the world, and she's a candidate, by the way, running for state legislature, when she says, we aren't that kind of people. She does not speak for me. People like her are going to get the rest of us killed.
I agree. I think that it comes a time in the world where you have to man up and face the reality of the truth of what must be done. And the truth is not always a beautiful thing. It has to be taken care of for the good of the nation, not for the good of a couple of people that want to do harm to the rest of us.
I am sick to death of liberals saying, well, it'll make my tummy feel better if I do this. I'll just get that wonderful, warm feeling if we... I'm sorry. But you know what? A 5-year-old girl sexually assaulted, that had been my daughter, somebody would be cruising for a bruising right now, and I wouldn't even wait for the law. And I'm telling you, people are getting fed up with this baloney. And if we have an attack that's similar now, because once one guy runs a truck over 8,500 people and kills them, monkey see, monkey do.
I believe that, and they seem, as you just said, they copycat each other, whatever is successful.
Right, and this had been recommended a long time ago, and somebody finally said, oh, you know what, I'll do it.
So I can't believe that Obama has not came up and actually said we need to put a ban on trucks. It really surprises me.
It won't be long. Thank you much for the call, Pat. Good hearing from you. You're up next. You're on the air on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. What's on your mind?
Yes, President Holland of France, when he spoke to the people, I sensed nothing there that seemed to think that he was going to change. He didn't seem to think that there was just no sense of urgency. It's just like they just think that this is going to somehow go away. And I say to myself, we get the same thing over here. At least Trump says, I'm the law and order candidate, and we will end this. These people know nothing other than a smash in the face. And I tell you, like I say, you wake up hoping that somehow something seems like it's going to be getting better, or at least heading that direction. And it just amazes me how they just are so delusional or dismissive. And one more point about Holland, president of France, and how these elitists think. He has a hairdresser that goes with him wherever he goes, and he pays $11,000 a month to this whatever. And you say, after you've lost this many people in your country, maybe you should get down to business, sir. I'll hang up. Thanks, Bill.
It just confirms what I've always thought. Most Frenchmen were hairdressers. 8:57, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Currently 68. We're going to have a very special guest coming up in the next hour, Paul Thompson, Reverend Paul Thompson. Some of you may know him from Eastside Baptist Church here in Twin Falls. He's talking a little bit about religious liberty and how to defend your religious faith. It all comes down to one of those 5 liberties guaranteed in that First Amendment. Also want to remind you, even though we're going to be in a stretch of really warm days across the valley, we're now headed toward the tail end of summer. You've got to start thinking about the colder weather and making sure that your heating unit is ready in advance. Got to call my friends at Ramsey Heating and Electric today. The team there is going to make sure the job is done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. You can call them. The number is 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. News is coming up next from Fox at 9 o'clock. One more hour of Top Story with Bill Colley. Still ahead on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.